Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started in about attendees, and we want to give everybody another minute or so to get themselves logged in. Good afternoon. So excited to see so many people attending this webinar today. We're really excited to have Dr. Fox presenting on program-wide implementation of the pyramid model. You can see the full title on your screen. If you are having any problems viewing your screen, just give me a little hands up sign and we'll try to address this. We will have everyone muted except obviously Dr. Fox, and we will be monitoring the questions in the question box. Most of you are not new to the system, but it's easier for us to monitor the questions through the questions than through chat. So please make sure you put any questions through the question box. And we will be stopping along the way to make sure we monitor these and that she has an opportunity to answer any questions. And with that, Dr. Fox, I believe you're unmuted and we are excited to hear what you have to say.
Great. So can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Terrific. Let's see if I can drive those slides. All right. I think I can. So I'm really excited to be invited to share with you more about the pyramid model and program-wide implementation. And what I thought I'd do today is talk to you briefly about what the pyramid model is and how we developed it. I want to talk about what we know about it, so share just a little bit of the research that supports the pyramid model. I think that's always an important question for us. I want to talk about some of the challenges of bringing it to early care and education programs and some of our experiences and what we know works in order to do implementation with Fidelity and to scale up the model. And then I'm going to end with some of the ways the pyramid model can help us in some new challenges that we're all encountering in our early learning programs. So hopefully this journey will be the kind of information that you want, but please ask questions so that I could stop and unpack a little bit more of things that might not be clear or that you might want more information about. So we are going to talk about the pyramid model, and I think most people are pretty familiar with what the pyramid model is. I do want to share a little bit about how it was developed and talk a little bit about the terminology as we develop the pyramid model. So the first thing I want to point out is, and you might be wondering, well, why'd you do that? We call it the competence, but we very much regard the pyramid as a framework of evidence-based practices. So the framework word is going to be important. Frameworks flex, frameworks hold practices within, But what we're not talking about is a specific curriculum. So we're actually talking about kind of a comprehensive system of evidence-based practices in support of promoting children's social emotional competence. Now, we were funded with 2 national technical assistance centers, and they really developed the pyramid model. And they were funded in around 2000, 2001 is when we got started. So funding, we had funding from Child Care, Head Start, and from the Office of Special Ed Programs. And so the faculty actually crossed both of these major TA centers, technical assistance centers, and we thought, what an amazing opportunity. We can develop something that is for all settings where children are. So for childcare, for Head Start, for public pre-K, for early childhood special ed, all the places where young children are, because of course our children are in a variety of places. And also, you know, family childcare homes and increasing the capacity of families. And so we really started our work with that in mind. We very much, as we thought about what do we bring to the field, and we were asked to bring training and technical assistance to the field to address this notion of kids challenging behavior. So, and more kids having challenging behavior. So we thought, what do we want to bring to the field and how do we want to bring it? And so we thought about, we want to have a shared message that works everywhere. We want to identify the evidence-based practices, not only that work, that are usable in those settings. And so I think in many ways that mission from our perspective has really driven some of the success we've had in implementation. We also, when we developed it, here are some of the first group of faculty that worked on this. We also were really intentional about what sciences we brought to figuring out the pyramid model. And so among these researchers and professionals, we have people from 0 to 3, we have people with mental health backgrounds, we have people with special ed, early ed, classroom, Head Start, and so culturally responsive practices. So we were really intentional about making sure that we had those great minds at the table to help us figure this out. Now, over the 20, or I guess 18 years that we've been doing the pyramid model, you'll hear it called a lot of different things. So we actually started out calling it the teaching pyramid and shifted our nomenclature to pyramid model. Some people, you'll go in some states, we have about 20 states that are engaged in state scale up. So in some states, if the Center on Social Emotional Foundations for Early Learning help them, they call our model CEFL. Some states, if the Technical Assistance Center on Social Emotional Intervention help them, they call what they're doing TAXI. We also have worked side by side with people in the field of positive behavior support, and many of us are known in the field of positive behavior support, so people might call it PBS. They might call it early childhood PBS or early child PBIS. And then in the last probably decade, the notion of a multi-tiered system of support for those of you who are in schools has become foci. And so in many ways, what we have is a multi-tiered system of support around children's social emotional competence and addressing behavior. Where we are now, and I put potato on the top, where we are now is, it is the pyramid model for promoting social emotional competence. And in the whole, is it PBIS or not, is it MTSS or not, what you'll hear from the folks at the PBIS Center and the folks who work in MTSS, that this is the PBIS MTSS for early childhood. Now, I shared with you that originally we were funded because people's concern about challenging behavior and kids getting expelled from pre-K. And these things were in the headlines at that time, in the beginning of our work. And people really wanted to help practitioners make sure that this didn't happen. we made a real critical decision at that point is we weren't going to develop a center of materials about making kids behave better. We weren't going to develop a center about how to tackle kids' behavior challenges and here are the behavior procedures you need to use to intervene, because we believe that this work, the bulk of this work, is about prevention and promotion, and that the answer around children's challenging behavior is about promoting children's social and emotional competence. In addition, we think this work is about building the capacity of programs, of teachers and programs, to be able to do that kind of promotion, prevention, and intervention practices. Intervention's still on the table. It's very important, and we have an approach that works, but it's really important that we're aligning all of our work to the promotion of children's social emotional competence. So I'm going to really briefly tell you, here's what we built. What we built was the pyramid model, and when we built it, we thought about what does it mean to do promotion, prevention, and intervention? And it's about support, right? The support of all children, all families, all teachers and providers. And it's helping people both have the competencies and the skills, but also the confidence to be able to support any child that crosses their threshold in a public pre-K, an early childhood, an early Head Start, a Head Start, a community child care program. And the other piece that was really important to us and maintains a focus is that we want to help kids be in the places where their parents enroll them. We want them to be successful in the pre-K that their parents select, in the child care their parents select. So we want to build the capacity of programs to be able to support the inclusion of all children and to not exclude children because of social, emotional, or behavioral delays or challenges. So the way the pyramid model works is we think about it, it is using this public health framework of what do you do for all children? And so at that level is what do we do to promote all children's social emotional competence? And then what do we do around children who need more, some children who are going to need more intervention? And then what are the practices that we need for children who present with challenging behavior, the very few children where we need to do more intensive interventions? And so the base of the pyramid is broad because there's more kids, right? And then it gets smaller and smaller. That's the design of a triangle or a pyramid. And so at the base of the pyramid, we have nurturing responsive relationships. So, you know, it's all about making sure that teachers have strong relationships with children, that we promote good relationships between children and stage so that we can have those relationships. We want to both connect deeply with the child as teachers and caregivers, but we also want to help parents and guide parents to have the skills and capacities in order to guide their child. So that means we need strong relationships with families so that we can work together around the support of children. And so at the relationships level, we're thinking about our relationships with children, our relationships with each other as a staff, as a strong team to support children, and then our relationships with families, so our partnerships with families so that together we can promote the social emotional development of young children. The relationships and then the supportive environments levels of the pyramid, of course, you know, have tons of research behind them. That's kind of the foundation of research of all of our quality work across the country, is that with responsive caregiving and high quality environments, that then children can develop the social emotional competence. So we look at relationships and then all of the aspects of what makes a high quality environment is critically important to promoting kids' social emotional competence. Now, when we train teachers or train early educators, we also help them see relationships and environments through the lens of what are the actions and practices that I use that are about promoting kids' social emotional competence. What are the actions and practices I use that will prevent challenging behavior from occurring? So it's through that lens. But it very much, I think, would resonate with what you feel strongly about constitutes a high-quality early childhood program, with a little bit more fine-tuning to bring that social emotional knowledge to that work. As we move up the pyramid, we want all children to receive a heavy focus of instruction and support around their social emotional development, because the birth to 5 years, let's face it, is really prime time for social emotional development. Kids come to us not very socially connected. They come to us looking for that one responsive caregiver playing by themselves, and through the years that they're with us in the birth to 5 time, connections to other children, and that they learn how to navigate the social world. And so we want to make sure instruction happens for all kids, and we have identified those key domains. But in addition to that, we want to make sure that our classroom practitioners are ready for kids who don't get it, for kids who need more intentional instruction. And so the domains we're thinking about are friendship skills, which is what we call that peer social interaction, and being able to initiate play and maintain play, to develop relationships with others as well as with adults. Emotional literacy, the ability to express emotions, understand emotions, to socially problem solve, so to navigate difficult social situations. Here you're seeing one of the materials we have, which is about the solution kit, when kids need a visual support to really understand what is social problem solving and how do you weigh various solutions. We have a way that we've used and teachers have used with really great success in their classroom. And then the other key area of focus is around self-regulation and anger management. Understand what it means to have strong emotions. So in addition to that, all children need teaching in all of those domains. We also want to make sure that we're paying attention to the children who need extra instruction for learning those skills. And so we're paying attention to those learning stages. So what does it take to learn the skill, to become fluent in that skill, and to be able to do that skill across multiple settings with multiple people and in multiple environments. And that's very important, especially for our children who might be at risk of having more challenging behavior. So then our last level of the pyramid is this intensive individualized intervention level. And we call it intensive individualized interventions, not because we're going to be intensive with children, but because it means it's intensive for adults. They need to use a process. They need to conduct an assessment, really a kind of a portfolio assessment of observations, data, and interview to get the information to understand the why of behavior. They need to work together as a collaborative team with the family and each other to develop a plan of intervention that's going to work and work quickly and effectively. They need to monitor the child's progress to make sure it works, and to meet again to be able to support that child. Only a few children are going to need this, And in a pyramid model classroom, very few children will need it. Often we go into classrooms and we ask them, how many kids do you think are at the top of the pyramid? And before a teacher's been trained, she might be like, oh my gosh, I think I have 6. Like 6 kids that need a behavior plan? And then we get pyramid practice in place, and really the reality is we have 1 that we need to focus on. So you have more time freed up to do this more intensive, planful, thoughtful intervention. But we believe that we have to have the capacity to do this, or we can't have these children in our programs, right? Somebody's going to cross the threshold with persistent, challenging behavior, and we want our programs and our teachers to be ready to be able to use a process to support those children. So as I said, it's a process that develops a behavior support plan for that child. And while we think it's intensive on our part, on the adult's part, the child experiences it as support. It's based on an assessment, it's designed by a collaborative team, and it will have strategies to prevent behavior from occurring and to ensure that we're not responding to behavior in a manner that pays it off. But the real core and the piece of the plan that's critically important is the plan is focused on teaching new skills to the child. All right, so that's the pyramid model. Yes, I can share the slides. I don't know how OEL can get it to you, but I would be happy to share slides with you so we can disseminate it. And are there any other questions that have popped up?
We had no other questions. We had a request for the websites, which we posted as well. And I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. Good. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about what we've learned. So we designed this. We've developed training materials that people can download for free and use. We've been doing this work for a long time. Many states are really focused on scaling it up, which is fabulous. But after we designed the model based on what the research says, so we did that, but we also then, many of us, and there's been a cast of a lot of faculty who've been engaged across multiple universities, started to do some research around this. And one of the things that we all know is important is to really test interventions so that we're confident that the interventions that we're out there encouraging people to do, that we have strong data to support. So I want to tell you a little bit about some stuff that we've learned about the pyramid and where we have moved in our work. I'm going to share with you information about 2 randomized controlled trials. So we have 2 randomized controlled trials, and it was my pleasure to be a part of the team that did this with Mary Louise Hemeter at the Vanderbilt University and Pat Snyder at the University of Florida. And these 2 trials we're looking at, if you bring pyramid to the classroom, does it make a difference? So if we help teachers implement these practices, does it make a difference for everyone in the class? That's something we've talked about, and let's see our data. Let's see what that looks like and what does it take to get teachers to implementation fidelity. So one of the things that's an outcome, we both developed it and used it in our studies, is a tool called the Teaching Pyramid Observation Tool, or the TPOT for short. So we developed that for doing the practices, because you can't test it, right, if you can't measure it. So anyone who says, I got a great intervention for you, you should say, and what will we use to measure the fidelity of it? Because you can say you're doing something, but unless I know for sure, for fact, you're doing it, it may or may not be true. So we actually developed this tool so we could measure where teachers were. The other thing that we did in our experiment is we developed a model for coaching teachers, a framework actually for coaching teachers, and tested it and used it in our experiments. We all know, right? We all know that high quality professional development is not just a workshop. That going to a workshop is great. You get great information. Often you get inspired. Oh, I want to do this. It piques your interest, but you can't walk out of a 2-hour workshop or even a day-long workshop really ready to implement with Fidelity. And what we know from the literature, from hundreds of studies in our field in early childhood, that we need coaching for professional development if we really want to support teachers to implement practices. The other thing we know is that the more complex the practice, probably the more coaching needs to happen, or that coaching is even more important. I would say to you, the notion that you're going to implement all tiers
Sorry.
Oh,
All right.
audio connection restored.
Okay.
It looks like
All
we're
right.
back on.
Thank you.
No worries. All right, so the practice-based coaching has its cyclical process, right? Not one and done. It is focused on practices. So it's not a coaching model that's about, I want to make you feel better about your teaching. I want you to feel better about your teaching, but I want you to feel better about your teaching because you've learned these practices. It includes setting goals, action planning, an observation piece that could be live or it could be video, and a feedback session. And then we go again. So it is cyclical, centered on practices, includes an action plan, observation, reflection, and feedback. And so this should look really familiar to many of you. Head Start has now adopted practice-based coaching as one of the things that they have brought to Head Start programs. It's been really nicely tested now, is being used and scaled up across many states. So we're using practice-based coaching in our TPOT. The other thing going into our experiment that's interesting is that when I described the pyramid to you, you might have said, well, I do that practice and I haven't been trained in the pyramid. What we recognize is that across these data are different studies that we did in the baseline measure of teachers on the pyramid, TPOT. And so what we see is teachers having about half or a third to half of the practices already. And so we view our work as helping teachers get to 80% and above to get to real proficiency. But what these data tell me are that every teacher is in a different place, right? Some teachers, we had a 19% of the practices, but we had an 86% of the practices. And so we know that we need to do something that both acknowledges the teacher's capacities as we start with them in our coaching process, and then tailor the amount of support that they get to get them to fidelity or proficiency. So I want to share with you some of what we have found in our randomized trials. What we did, these were inclusive classrooms, so they had children with disabilities. We randomly assigned teachers. They weren't very happy about that. I mean, they agreed to it. So our teachers who got in the experimental condition They got 3 days of training. We created some guides for them to give them ideas. We gave them puppets and CDs and some books and Tucker the Turtle. And then we gave them coaching. And so in our first study, out 13 weeks of coaching, and in our second study, they got 16 weeks of coaching. Our control teachers let us come in and measure and hung in with us. They were amazing. And at the end, they got all their training, but they didn't get coaching. And here's what we found out. So wave 2 is when we started and teachers received very little coaching, like the first session to get their action plan and to rapport build. So at wave 2, we already see a difference between our teapot condition teachers and our control condition. And that purple with the asterisk means it was a significant difference with a nice effect size. So starting coaching, our teachers who've got training and guides and a coach now and a plan. Wave 3, which happened right after Christmas break, our teachers are much different than the control teachers because of the coaching, so they've continued to grow in their implementation of practices. And wave 4, we see more growth. So what does that mean? That means that the coaching and training works to improve teachers' practices. Well, what does it mean for the children? So we had target children, children that on a teacher rating form looked like kids who might have challenging behavior. We had them select them early. We picked 2 to 3 in every classroom. We tried to get 2 to 3 in every classroom. And then, of course, we had to get parents to consent. So we wanted to look at those kids individually. And then we wanted to get measures on all other children. And so what you see here is target and non-target children. And then you see on a rating scale called the Social Skills Improvement System, which gives you 2 subtests, problem behavior and social skills. And you see the difference between control and treatment. So look at non-target kids. So these are all kids in a classroom. We see an effect on behavior, a significant difference for our kids in our teapot classrooms. And we see a significant difference for our kids on social skills. For our target children, we see a significant difference in problem behavior and problem behavior reduction that's important, and getting down to more normal levels for these kids who are elevated, and we see a significant difference in their social skills. So what we know is bringing the pyramid model for classroom-wide implementation makes a difference for all children, and it makes it have challenging behavior. So kind of, yay, everything's great, and we live happily ever after, right? So let's just train and coach a bunch of teachers. Well, one of the things we feel pretty strongly about, and isn't that little one adorable, is, and we think we know from the literature, that we know training alone won't work. We know we need training and coaching, and when we do that coaching, it's about the fidelity of implementation of practices. But how do you bring this to a community early childhood program, to a public pre-K program, to a Head Start classroom? Do teachers just go off and get their training and, you know, it's all great? Well, we know that we need more than that. In order to really bring something like this to a program, it's bigger than training teachers. And so I love this quote, because I think it just distills kind of what the problem and challenge is for us in early care and education, that the use of effective interventions without implementation strategies is like having serum or the medicine without the syringe. The cure is available, but the delivery system is not. And so much of our work now has been focused on how do you help programs bring the pyramid model to their program? What does it take to make that work? And that's what I wanted to focus on a little bit with you. So what it takes to make that work is you need to have a leadership team that says we want to bring the pyramid model. And so we've been working kind of in this space for the last 10 years, I think, helping people manner by establishing a leadership team. That might be at a site level. Here in Tampa, Florida, we have 2 child care programs that are participating in implementing the pyramid model, and they own 2 child care, the Merry-Go-Round South Point and Merry-Go-Round Hanaway, and the leadership team is at those small community sites, and it's a small little team. You might then, we've scaled up in Minnesota, and leadership teams are more at a school district level in school district implementation. They have their early childhood programs implementing within the schools, Head Start and early childhood special ed, and their voluntary pre-K program. So it depends on the nature of where you're bringing it. We worked in Southeast Kansas, has been doing this now for 15 years. Their program is across many miles in Southeast Kansas, and many community leadership team is at the grantee office, and that's where they do this work. And their work is about guiding these elements, how to get staff buy-in, what's the family engagement part of this, establishing the expectations, what will be our procedures to get kids a plan when they need it, how will we organize coaching, train coaching, allocate our coaching resources, and then a huge piece is monitoring data and making decisions based on the data. And so this is the work of the leadership team. They develop an implementation plan, and they have a measure or a tool that helps them do that, that helps them know what the pieces are that they need to have in place, what's next for them. We have training to help them understand all those pieces. And these are all the pieces that need to be in place for teachers to be able to do these evidence-based practices. And so our pieces are very on the pyramid model that people can access. There's online training that people could access and subscribe to. The leadership team thinks about how do we bring coaching so that we can use practice-based coaching to support our teachers to learn the practices. And they establish what's going to be our procedure if we have a kid who's top of the pyramid. What should the teacher do? Who will guide the behavior support planning process? How will we determine when we're going to develop a behavior plan? How will we invite the family to the table around that? What's our expectation of the people who are implementing the plan, who are, of course, our teachers, for progress monitoring and review? One of our colleagues has conducted a study and manualized this behavior support planning. It's called Prevent, Teach, Reinforce for Young Children. So it really helps unpack the process and has all the forms and really guides the team step by step. And so often when we're training, we will train someone within the program to be able to do this piece. And then with the leadership team, we'll have these data pieces that will help them make decisions both about their implementation as well as teachers' implementation. So the benchmarks of quality helps them think about, are we doing what we need to do as a leadership team? And then the teapot, which I told you about, and our infant toddler measure that's about to be published is called the tippy toes for infant toddler classroom. Those help us know, is our teachers doing that? And each of those have their own spreadsheets and data summaries so that the leadership team can look at that and identify where teachers need to grow and where they need to support teachers. At the program level, we have a way for our team to look at behavior incidents. And then, of course, we're looking at our child progress monitoring, which could be something like TS Gold in general for all of the kids, but also our kids who get extra instruction, what progress monitoring are we doing there? So, for example, our benchmarks of quality, this is what the graphic output looks like. A lot of these tools are available on our website, which is challengingbehavior.org. One of the cool things about the people I work with on pyramid work is we made a commitment early on that anything we developed that we could share for free, we would be sharing for free. And so you'll find a lot of resources about this work on challengingbehavior.org. So the leadership team can look at this and say, we need to grow in our staff buy-in. What's our missing piece? What's next on our plan? One of the things we tell our leadership teams is this is not a sprint. You will not do this overnight. This takes 2 to 3 years to get to full fidelity. So they give themselves the time and the space to work on their implementation over time, which is really important. We believe that when you implement something like this, you don't turn back. You know, it's not a curriculum you pick up and use and then you put away later and you move on to the next thing, but it really changes your way of work within the program overall. We designed, here's the teapot data. This, again, is a data display that just pops for you. You know, the leadership team can look at this. This shows data across 10 teachers in their fall measure, which is blue, 9 teachers in their spring measure, which is red. So one teacher was out with a baby with the spring assessment. And what we see here is they're still kind of not where you want them to be on teaching problem solving, on teaching social emotional skills every day, supporting families to implement pyramid practices. They're great at family engagement and connecting to families, these teachers, but there's still growth in helping families understand social emotional practices. So if I look at this as a leadership team, then I'm more planful about my professional development. I might be more planful about the materials I need to bring to the classroom because I have this knowledge that I can look at quickly and discuss with my colleagues. We've also developed a way to track children's behavior incidents, and the whole point of this system is not to target kids in a way that's punishing, but is to be able to support the child, support the teacher, and think about what might the program need to do for program improvement. So it's a really easy, quick form that we teach teachers in a little hour webinar. What a behavior is: behavior incident report worthy or BIR worthy. They know they can complete this. It takes about 30 seconds when a kid has an incident. You don't watch the kid have an incident, but when you have a moment, you go and fill it out. You turn it into someone, they enter the data into a spreadsheet that's already wired to give graphic output. And it allows then the leadership team to know what are the behaviors that are happening in our program by child, by classroom, and across everybody. And what activities are our behavior happening? What if we found out that most of our behaviors were in outdoor play in our program? So our cross-program view told us that. What would we do differently? What are the behaviors about? How are people responding to the behaviors? What if I looked across my program and I saw timeout was being used more than any other response strategy? There might be something I want to do about that, which would be teaching people some alternate forms of responding to behavior. So the data really help people make strategic decisions. Any questions so far?
We did have one question about how this model compares to the Lassinger model.
So the Lassinger model of coaching?
Yes.
So I don't know the Lassinger model of coaching well, so I can't answer that. I will share with you that if you want to unpack this more, if you know the Lassinger model and you want to compare, that a good place to go for a lot of resources around practice-based coaching is the eClick website, the Early Childhood Knowledge Learning Center, I think is what eClick stands for. Just Google practice-based coaching, Head Start, and it'll take you there, and you can see a lot of materials that we've developed around it, including videos and interactive elements that would help you understand it more.
Okay, and while, as you continue, we will find that link and put it up for everyone to see that as well. Sure, thank you.
All right, so let me tell you a little bit about where we're going, and you might have noticed that I have a logo down here on my slides, NCPMI. So we've been funded federally again, the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations, and are doing our more national work again, as well as, you know, we do other kinds of projects. And one of the things that has happened is the headlines were back. And I think all of you remember these headlines because it actually resulted in some important policy changes with the Child Care Block Grant, right, around kids suspension and expulsion. And the alarming thing is that in addition to being witness to kids being suspended and expelling, is there are these data around inappropriate discipline practices and bias. And so we've been recently refunded. I want you to go back to challengingbehavior.org and kind of remember it's there. We're developing a lot of materials. We have some new materials you may not have seen yet. Kind of every week we're popping some new things that is really designed to help you implement the pyramid model. So the concerns were this, right, that we were having a lot of preschool children in the Office of Civil Rights data, and remember these data come to the Office of Civil Rights from public preschool programs, so they're really not representative of all programs. But we see a large number of kids suspended, and I was shocked in the data that were just released this year that we have kids receiving, preschoolers receiving corporal punishment. So that is really concerning. And of course, that we believe, and we have federal policy, that these are inappropriate practices. We also then see that when this occurs, it's occurring with disproportionality. So with African Americans, 19% of the population, but 46% of the suspensions, something's wrong here. Something's not working here. And what people believe, I don't think anyone goes into early care and education saying, you know, I'm going to get those black kids or I'm a racist, but we see our implicit biases play out in our response to difficult situations. I believe that we have good consensus that people feel that these data suggest that there's evidence of inequity and implicit bias. No one is doing this intentionally, aggressively, we believe, but we do believe our biases. And when you start thinking about what does implicit bias mean, or you take the online implicit bias test, you might be shocked about recognizing your biases. And so we think that's really important that we get a handle on in our programs. We see, I can't even imagine why corporal punishment's going on in a early care and education program or a public preschool program, and yet we see that happening. And the reason all of this is very alarming and disturbing is And some people have framed this as I was at a conference recently and she was talking about it as the cradle to prison pipeline. That people have talked about a preschool to prison pipeline, that when kids are expelled, shut out, pushed out, not receiving the services they need, that predicts more suspension and expulsion in K through 12. We have the data that show that. And those kids are more likely to not be successful in school, end up in juvenile justice, and have contact and be incarcerated as they grow into adulthood. And so all of this data I'm sharing with you to say we need to think about this as we think about how to support teachers and how we support children. And so in our new center, we've been charged with looking at that. We had a little bit of money over the last 2 years to kind of work through some of that. So we were like, the pyramid model is fantastic. Overall, it does great. Our teachers love it. Our kids do well. We developed it to be, culturally responsive. Yet, and then people said, well, so what are your elements that really address implicit bias, and how can you detect implicit bias, and how do you coach if a teacher has bias, and how do you help them use more culturally responsive practices, because that would be part of the solution, right? And what are your materials? And we're kind of like, oh, right, you're right. There's lots more work that we need to do. So we worked actually over the last 2 years in 2 sites. So we had some federal money to work within preschool development programs. Preschool development programs were designed to serve children with really high needs and high needs communities, so kids in deep poverty and who needed pre-K programs. And so these are 4-year-olds who meet poverty eligibility. So we worked in 2 programs, one in Nashville and one in Clifton, New Jersey. And we brought them the pyramid model, but we also brought them some additional pieces. So we brought them training in addressing implicit bias. What is it? We all got it. How do you know if you have it? What do you do about it? And the notion of culturally responsive practices and how those things are important to all of our work. So unpacking each of those pieces. So we brought some additional training to them. We help them think about the use of the practice-based coaching framework in their work around making sure that not only are they implementing the pyramid practices with Fidelity, but they're doing it in a way that's equitable and culturally responsive. And then more recently, and we've just put this on the website, we've created a coaching guide around equity issues. So one of the things is, well, what if there is an issue? What if you're in a classroom and you realize that the teacher acknowledges the boys much more frequently and kind of has the expectation that the girls in the class would be doing what they ought to do, and I don't need to do anything additional to support them. Like, all right, well, here's an inequity happening in the classroom, or we realize that they have a different perspective about the Hispanic children and the support of them than the support of all other children in the classroom. Well, once you notice that, how do you have a conversation about that with the teacher? How do you problem solve with that? Especially when teachers are, your impression of them is that they're good and they're trying very hard, but this is just a piece that you want to help them see could be changed in terms of their practice. And so that's what our coaching guide does. So it gives you reflection questions as a coach to see if there might be issues and to use multiple forms of data, sources of data that you might have on the classroom to really identify what's the issue you're seeing. And then we have professional development resources so the coach is ready. You don't want to go into a coaching conversation and not be ready with resources or guidance about what to do. And then we've given the coach guidance on how to start that conversation. Step 4 is the reflection and feedback session. So how will that go? So being prepared to initiate the conversation and guide the conversation and the reflection. And then some tips if they're worried that the teacher might be resistant to hearing it. So how do you navigate that so that you still have the teacher wanting to work with you as a coach and not shutting down, but engaged in this process? So we're really excited about that and offering that to folks. We also went back to our behavior incident report, and it is on this really hefty spreadsheet. It'll be available in October for people to use. And we added elements so that not only does it immediately graph all these pieces, you know, what's the behavior across kids, in a classroom, across the program, but we also wired it so it gives the team equity alerts. So if the incidents, if we have more incidents around, let's say, Latino boys, it will say, you know, this is, we're seeing disproportionality. Doesn't say, it just, it guides your team to go look at the data. If you were to have an occasion, now in our 2 sites, we have no suspensions and expulsions. If you were to have a suspension and expulsion, it would show you an alert around that because of wanting to not have that suspensions or expulsions from the program. It will look at those data through ethnicity, race, dual language learners, and gender, and IEP status, so that we can see, are we inequitable on any of those? So in it, we actually help our program see that some of their actions really constitute suspension. And, you know, people have talked about in our field, you know, not everyone gets written up and you're suspended, but if you call mom and say, will you pick him up and don't come back until Thursday, he needs a few days at home, you just have, in essence, even though you didn't use the word suspension, you just suspended a child. And we think if you tell a kid, go spend the rest of the day with Miss Amelia because you get along with her better and I'm just tired of you, you've just done an in-school suspension because you've taken the child out of his classroom and away from his peer group. And so in doing this, we've really unpacked a lot of that. So the graph looks something like this, you know, this, and it generates it automatically for you as you put in the data. I won't spend a lot of time because we're running out of time. Right?
we have about 3 minutes left.
Okay. Yeah, so it gives you this graphic analysis so that you can see. So this is across all incidents, but any graphic analysis here, these are the behaviors they saw and how they impact. You also can get it by classroom and by child, and it has what are called pivot tables in it, so you can sort your data automatically. So what was really exciting with those 2 programs we worked with is no suspensions, no expulsions, people very focused on this. Family engagement was fantastic. We've created a workbook that will be up with it to know how to unpack your data and to look at your data and what to do if you have an equity alert, what the problem-solving steps might be with the team. But our sites got to high fidelity of the leadership team, high fidelity of the teachers, no suspensions, no expulsions, and really lovely, as we would expect in a high quality program, some really nice outcomes on the TS Gold for those children. And so we are really thrilled that we have that federal funding to put more pieces to try to address this really difficult, I think, and challenging problem that we have in our country. If you are interested in all this and just new to the pyramid, I want to remind you we have a national conference every year here in Florida in St. Petersburg. It's a lovely event. It is really focused on skill building, so it's in-depth workshops, 3-hour-long workshops that you choose. Last year we had Dr. Walter Gilliam come and talk to us about implicit bias and some of his research. It's a great event, small conference, about 500 people, lots of contact with the presenters, really deep and focused learning experience kind of on all things pyramid model. So if you haven't come before, I hope you might be able to get there because we would love to have you. Was there any other questions that we could address?
There was one question about a program that's been using this model for 15 years. How long did it take them to implement to Fidelity, and then how long did it take to see results? The program that you mentioned earlier.
So you're going to begin to see results. They saw results in their first year, and actually that was the Head Start director. She reflected that her goal in doing something different in the way she had organized her program was because teachers were so stressed out and so unhappy. And so she felt like she saw teachers being calm and not using their mental health consultant as a SWAT team member to get kids out of the program or get kids out in the hall and out of the classroom. She saw that happen within their first year of implementation. They were probably a good 2 years to kind of get it in place in every center, get teapots on everybody, everyone getting some amount of coaching. But what happens is you continue, as we change our practices and create new innovations, they also bring in more innovations. They moved it then, they started with their Head Start classroom teachers, they moved it to their early Head Start program with some of the infant and toddler materials that we have, and within their home visiting work. And then we have some components that are how do you run parent groups. They've done that. So they've kind of continued to bring on new pieces. So when you bring on a new piece, then you're also into a new Fidelity curve, right, of getting to that place of Fidelity with that piece.
Thank you. I do not see any other questions at this point, and we cannot thank you enough for your time. This is amazing information. Yeah, we really appreciate you. And to attendees, we will send out the presentation then, and we will also try to send out the recording.
Terrific. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Thank you so much. Have a beautiful afternoon.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon.